Hi, my name is Patrick. I'm going to be doing my midterm presentation today. I apologize if my computer is laggy or just about everything in this presentation. I'm not very good with public speaking, and I am even worse with recording myself. So this is extraordinarily out of my comfort zone. Yeah. Question one, why are bias and hate crimes different from typical crimes? Um, I found four reasons that I could go into for this one: motivation, intent, effect, and reporting. Um, so with motivation, it's more so about the fact that when people are committing a hate or bias crime, they are motivated by the fact that they can attack somebody who they know is vulnerable. Um, the best example that I found was the Oregon v. Plowman case, where three white men beat up two Hispanic men for seemingly no reason. The three white men had asked the two Hispanic men if they had any coke to sell when the two men replied that they didn't. Um, the three white men then attacked them, using racial language and shouting out white power, which just goes to show that they were under the impression that they could attack these people because they knew that they were vulnerable because of the color of their skin. So I found that the motivation of attacking people or groups just specifically because they are vulnerable, really differentiated hate crimes and bias incidents from typical crimes. And then for intent, obviously, for a hate crime to be considered that, it needs the motivation of bias. So the intent is usually bias-driven actions. Um, I had a couple of good examples of that, Barclay versus Florida and Virginia v. Black. Um, and Barclay versus Florida, it was a black man who killed a white man because he was affiliated with a movement whose goal was to indiscriminately kill white people, showing that their intent was out of bias, and their intent was to cause harm to a specific group of people. And then effect, I've found that the effect that a hate crime or a bias incident has on groups of people, communities, whatnot, is a lot greater and different than typical crimes. So a community that is related to or surrounds the victim uh, that has been attacked or whatnot, the groups around it, the communities around that victim are going to feel a ripple effect of fear, essentially, and not being safe. So versus like a typical crime, most typical crimes you hear about and you don't feel personally worried. The communities around you don't typically feel like they are also going to be targeted or or be a victim of that crime next. So whereas hate crimes, they will often there's a lot of fear that you will be targeted as well for the same reason that the victim was originally targeted. And then reporting was the last one that I found, just because hate crimes and bias incidents are less likely to be reported just out of fear of reporting specifically a hate crime or incident. Whereas typical crimes, if somebody has a fear of reporting that, that's due to their own personal relations, opinions on police. But the victim of a hate crime or a bias crime is going to have some fear about retaliation, maybe not being taken seriously, etc. That will stop them from reporting. So I found that those four reasons were the main were very compelling to me in what differentiates a hate crime from a typical crime. Question two, does hate crime legislation violate our First Amendment right? Unfortunately, I would say that most of them seem to be yes. My first best example was the RAV versus City of Paul case. In that case, several teenagers burned crosses on or burned a cross on a neighbor's lawn, on a black family's lawn. Um, however, it was questioned if the ordinance that they were sorry, it was questioned if the ordinance that was used to convict them of the hate crime was overly broad and content based, and whether it violated the First Amendment's free speech use. And the outcome was that yes, it does violate the First Amendment's right, because uh, the speech that or the language that was used in the ordinance was very pointed and specific. And then another one that I found that worked in that show demonstrated how it does violate the First Amendment right was the Wisconsin versus Mitchell, as well as Virginia versus Black. Um, in Virginia versus Black, there was the question of, does the Commonwealth of Virginia's cross-burning statute, which prohibits the burning of a cross with the intent of intimidating any person or group of persons, violate the First Amendment? And then the court found that yes, it does, and that burning all cross burnings violated the First Amendment rights, but violating specifically cross burnings that with the intent to intimidate did not and was constitutional. So it all kind of comes down to the language that is used when creating this legislation. And then Matal v. Tam was another one that all four of these, it found that the First Amendment rights were violated. Um, but in this one, it was found that there are very narrow and specific categories in which the government may regulate speech, such as fraud, defamation, and incitement, and that the legislation that was used here did in fact violate and regulate speech in a sorry regulate speech in a violation of the First Amendment right. And all of that I found from reports of the court cases, all documented on oyas.org. Um, and so, question three, do hate crime laws serve a symbolic purpose? And is it worth passing legislation for this purpose? I would say yes and yes. Hate crime laws can interfere with First Amendment rights due to the language that are used in the laws and in legislation. However, that doesn't stop those laws and legislatures from existing, as well as doing some good, showing community members that their government does care about them and does want to protect them, even if they can't actually legally do that. As in the previous slide, all four of those cases were found to have violated the First Amendment right based on the hate crime laws that were used to try and protect those victims, or prosecute the people who had committed the crimes. Um, However, this legislation and these laws don't stop people from feeling protected and from feeling like they are cared for in the communities. Um, and so I found that there was a lot of symbolic laws, including like traffic laws, mostly marijuana legislation and adultery laws. But marijuana legislation seemed to be the best comparison, just in the sense that it is a federal, there's a federal prohibition. Um, yes, I think that's the correct word, of marijuana distribution, growing, usage, etc. However, that doesn't stop states from legalizing and decriminalizing it. And the federal level of government doesn't seem to really enforce marijuana legislation, except for when, like every now and then when they decide. So it's kind of more symbolic, as well as a lot of adultery laws in different states that I could find were the best other example of like state specific laws. There's a lot of laws that aren't actually enforced about adultery and whatnot, but they just seem to serve a symbolic purpose of just demonstrating a value that either that whatever level of government has. And then question four um, was how reliable is our data on hate crimes? What factors especially impact the quality of hate crime data in the US? Um, Going back again to the week four data collection, police reporting section, I got a lot of my information from the NCVS, but there was a couple of other places, including UCLA, that seemed to be very helpful. Or sorry, not UCLA, ACLU. Wow, too many letters in or the same letters in two different of an order. Um, but there's a lot of organizations that go out of their way to try and get accurate data since our police and FBI reporting doesn't seem to be very reliable or accurate. Um, so while we don't have reliable data from our direct level of government, so the FBI, state government, or state police, etc., organizations like the UVC, oh my gosh, NCVS, as well as ACLU, the Global Fund for Women, the NAACP. A lot of those do their own data collection and reporting just so that way there's actually a reliable and accurate data out there somewhere. It's just not done on a state or FBI level. Um, I found it very interesting how there was so much admittance of there being a lack of reporting when it comes to hate crimes and bias incidents, yet a reluctance to address that and fix it. Um, so I think that the NCVS is trying to kind of fill in that gap so that way we can have reliable reporting and reliable data that we can count on, as well as feeling a little bit more safe to report, since the NCVS, their reporting seems to be a lot more confidential, as well as not making you feel like maybe there will be some sort of retaliation or a long legal process that you have to exhaust yourself with. And then yeah, so I think that we it depends on where you're sourcing your data from. We have pretty reliable data from certain sources. It just is not reliable when it's coming directly from state police or FBI due to the process that they have in place, which is unfortunate. And that is all. I use mostly just the weekly lectures that were posted, as well as I literally opened up every single resource and article that has been posted in the Moodle, as well as used just a lot of Department of Justice information, NCVS information, and I used the oyas.org to read through court cases and just collect examples for this report, not report, presentation. So that is my presentation. Again, I apologize greatly for everything. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I guess that's it. All right.